Any legal information obtained during this video may not be applicable to your particular circumstances. If you have a legal concern, you should consult with a lawyer who can give you the specific information and advice that you deserve. Jonathan Klein has practiced family law exclusively for almost 20 years and has represented clients successfully with settlements, trials, and appeals at all levels of court in Ontario.
Hi, and welcome back to another amazing episode at Stella Talk Show. Today, we're going to talk about a very crucial subject, which is family law. We have a special guest, as I mentioned, Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Oh, it was very nice having you here. Before we dive in deep into today's topics about relationships, tell us a little bit about yourself and why family law.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm a family lawyer. I've actually only ever been a family lawyer, and 99% of what I do is dealing with family law topics. It's kind of a euphemism for divorce law. Most of what I do is divorces and separations for common law people. We also do marriage contracts and cohabitation agreements and sort of anything related to that.
That's amazing. And you've been doing this for about 10 years now?
Almost 20.
Almost 20. Oh, wow. It's a long time.
Yeah.
So you have seen it all.
I've seen it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Every new person has something different about their story. And, it's tempting cognitively to categorize people into this is that type of case.
Yes.
But when you get to know them, there's always something special and unique and surprising. If you think you've seen it all, you haven't.
You have. No, that's true. Every story is unique, right? Yeah. That's amazing. So let's talk about family law today. So Spencer Sean, he has mentioned the more informed we are, the more we understand and the better we are able to protect ourselves, our family, and assets. That's the most important part. So just keeping that in mind, when it comes to family law, what are your main thoughts?
Well, that's a very broad question, which is perfect because, we would resist giving any sort of specific advice when being recorded. And it's very common to say, remember, this is not legal advice for you. There's such a wide range of people and situations and experiences. So I could talk about family law generally, and I'm happy to. And I'm actually more happy to than talking about some specifics, because what is great advice for one person is not great advice for the other person. And someone will come to me and their friends is getting separated and their lawyer told them this, so they assume that it's the same for them. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not.
Yes.
So it really, different jurisdictions can be different, right? If you're in York Region, the culture might be different than in Peel or in Toronto. It can make little differences, but if you have to wait 2 months to see a judge in one jurisdiction and 8 months to see a judge in a different jurisdiction, you're going to behave differently because you know that, you'll know how hard or easy it might be to get somebody to understand what the problem is and how to resolve it, and are they going to be able to resolve it?
No, that's true. I know it's a very broad subject to talk about, and as you mentioned, it's not going to be the same for everybody because everybody has a unique situation that they're in or unique storyline that contributing to why they're now looking into family law attributes, right?
Yeah, not just that. Ontario, we have our laws in Ontario. There's some overlap with other provinces, and there's some non-overlap with other provinces. It's very specific and very local, and you'll see there's no huge legal chain stores, right?
That's true.
Because there can't be even national or international. It just wouldn't work because the knowledge is so localized.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
But speaking generally about family law, especially in Ontario, I'm really impressed with how fair the laws are here generally. The system does not always get everything right by any means. There are problems, but the big picture of it is, I think it's quite fair.
That's amazing. That's good to know. So just touching on Ontario, that you said the family law is better compared to the other provinces. I'm sorry, I'm not very aware about that factor. So it's good. I'm also learning with you today. Can you tell me how Ontario family law handles division of assets during a separation or a divorce?
Broadly speaking, in Ontario, you are dividing the the profits of the marriage, like the wealth gained over the course of the marriage. And very broadly speaking, we do that by taking a financial snapshot of a person's net worth when they get married, a financial snapshot of the person's net worth on the day they separate. That may not always be very clear what day that is, but we try.
Yeah.
And then we look at what is the growth between those two dates. And we look at it for each person and divide the profits equally, essentially. We do that with a money payment. So we're trying to avoid interfering with a business. Like, we don't want to force the sale of shares from one partner to the other unless they own a company together and they can't continue to operate that company together because for the same reasons that the marriage broke up.
Okay.
But for the most part, family law wants to get out of the way of business and not, move assets around between people as long as there's a way to make things equal.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So, like, when it comes to family law, like, there are a lot of things to think about. Not only like your personal assets, but what you have gained through the business world as well as a couple.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I wasn't thinking that far, so you made me think now.
Yeah. And that's just for married people.
Yes.
Right. So a common law couple separating, the way property division works is total. I mean, it's not totally different. We do try to look to what we do for married people by analogy, depending on how long the common law relationship is. But that area of the law has been entirely made by the legal system. Whereas for married people, it's created by Parliament, right? Elected politicians came up with that.
Yes.
For common law people, it's law that has developed in the common law. And the common law is the history of judge-made decisions interpreted by future judges and followed by future judges. And it's the collected wisdom of all those decades of decisions come to bear on your little family and trying to do the fairest thing that's possible.
As possible. That's true. So what are some of the factors that determine spousal support or child support when it comes to that stage in a relationship?
So child support is essentially the number of children and the payor's income and what province you live in. Those are the three key elements.
Okay.
The child support recipient, and with whom the children live, which is not always clear.
Okay.
The amount of time the children live with each parent matters.
I see. Okay.
And that can actually, that can be one of the most difficult things because when the amount of time you spend with your kids or the amount of time that your kids live with you has an impact on how much money you owe each other every month, everyone's aware of it, and everyone has to deal with that tension between fighting over time with the kids having a financial impact.
Understand, yeah. Very sensitive topics to talk about.
It's really tough.
Yes.
And spousal support has different factors.
Yeah.
Length of the marriage, whether there are children or not, incomes of both parties, but also whether you're in the sort of relationship where spousal support is needed or is appropriate. So we have two different ways of thinking about it. There's compensatory spousal support and non-compensatory spousal support.
Okay.
Compensatory is when the person is being compensated for their contribution to the marriage, right? It happens that in a couple, one person has sacrificed their own economic interest, their career, for the other spouse. And the other spouse has succeeded in their career because the other spouse was carrying part of that burden.
Yeah.
And so so spousal support, the aim of spousal support is to correct or compensate for the loss of having that economic support from your partner whose career is taken off. And the longer you are together, the closer you should expect to be for the rest of your lives in terms of income, regardless of who's bringing in the money.
I see. Oh, that's interesting. Wow, that's a lot of information that you just threw out there.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that, you know, we don't really think about those factors, right? You know, when you're in a relationship, like, it's always giving. No, it's more than taking, it's always giving. But when it comes to the nitty-gritties, like, it's good to know that what you just mentioned, the details we have to be aware of.
Yeah. And I didn't even talk about non-compensatory spousal support.
Yeah, no, yeah, please go ahead.
Which is, I mean, very broadly speaking, it's basically the cases where it's just, there's a need for it. There's something about the nature of the relationship where it may not be, you may not be economically compensating a person for their contributions to the relationship or the contributions to that other person's career directly, but there's just a need has developed because of the relationship.
Yes.
And the relationship between these two people is such that spousal support is appropriate.
Wow, okay.
The aim is to achieve fairness and self-sufficiency as far as possible. So there is also an expectation on people who don't have an income to find a way to get an income.
Find it, yeah.
The goal is to promote self-sufficiency.
Self-sufficiency, yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's, it's like, I'm listening to your answers, and I'm thinking, like, no, I'm not going to think about these things on a normal day. No, yeah. That's why it's important to talk to, like, people who are going through these things with different couples or different people relationship situations, so you can educate yourself, so you kind of know, like, hey, what's going to happen if this happens, right? And what I need to look out for, and what are these things really means, because it's always good to be in the know. Most definitely. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, of course.
And also, when it comes to the rights for common law partnerships in Ontario compared to married couples regarding property and finances, what are your take in there?
It's mostly the same during the relationship. The biggest difference is what happens to you after the relationship ends.
Okay.
A lot of Ontario's law has consolidated around treating non-married couples the same as married couples. There are a couple exceptions. I don't know all of them. I'm sure there's. One is a spouse cannot be compelled to testify against their married spouse in a criminal trial. But common law spouse, I think, can be compelled to testify against their common law spouse.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I could be wrong about that, right? Because that's not my area of law. But that was like the example of a very niche case.
Niche case, yeah.
The big cases are, that I know of, are family law separating and not being entitled to intestate rights. If your partner dies without a will and you're not married, you're not in the line of succession.
That's why that's where the will becomes important document to have.
Everyone should have. Well, almost everyone should have a will.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So, like, when it comes to let's talk about property ownership.
Okay.
So, when it comes to married couples owning a property together, both names on the property, or a common law couple owning a property with both names on the property, what's the difference? Like, what are things to know for? And in case if they're coming to an end in the relationships, how does that work?
Almost none.
Almost none. Okay.
Almost none if it's jointly owned.
Okay.
It's a great question. It's what I talked about before with the common law person, like coming into the relationship. What you bring into the relationship matters more. If you're getting married, you're looking at and you end up separating. You're looking at what you brought in versus
what are you walking out with?
Are walking out with.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the ownership rights. You're even married people. You're not transferring property, an item, an object, land that you owned to your other person automatically. In a common law as the same, or you and I would be the same, right? You're still independent as to property and debts.
Okay, I see. So what happens, like, let's say a couple is in a common law partnership and they own a home, but the house is only owned by one person. Does that make a difference?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you're owning it together, not much difference. If one person owns it and the other doesn't, significant difference. Many different scenarios. You kind of need specific advice about that.
Specific advice about that. Okay. And is it the same for a married couple too?
No.
No, it's different. Yeah.
There are edge cases where it can make a difference if one person owns the whole property and the other one doesn't. In fact, it's one of the exceptions to that regime I was talking about before.
I see. Okay.
If a person brings a property into a marriage, there's a quirk of how things are divided where that might not count as among your assets on the starting date.
I see. Okay.
It goes back to the 80s, right? When modern family law was created, they created an exception for what's called the matrimonial home, which is a home that was brought into the marriage and that is still being occupied, lived in by the couple at the end of the marriage. So the idea, in the 80s, there were many couples that had been together for a long time. Maybe and the house was the major asset of the family.
Yes.
And if one person brought that into a marriage and they were together for 30 years and then they separated and the person said, well, the growth in the value of property was not the same in the 80s as it is now.
Yes.
So this quirk of the law said you're not allowed to deduct the amount that you brought in if it's the house that you brought into the marriage and you're still living in. That law is still on the books and it can have weird and I think unfair implications. So
at times, yeah.
If you are bringing a house that you own into a marriage, you need advice.
You need advice, most definitely. That's really good that you mentioned that because, anybody that who are excited in getting in that, living together situation or getting into a married situation and now expanding their family in the house they own, these are things that we don't really think about. But it's good to know because, it's rather than becoming hard lessons, these are like anticipated lessons are better.
Yeah.
Right? So it's always good to read about it or talk to some people who are advanced in these subjects to get that information is very important. So family lawyer to go.
Also, if you're common law, if you're bringing a property into a common law relationship, you extra want to get advice from a lawyer because it's not guaranteed that you're going to keep all of that property, all of the value of the property, and it's not going to. There's no automatic way to compensate for who contributes what during a common law relationship.
Yeah.
Whereas in a marriage, it's neutral as to who contributes what during the marriage.
During the marriage.
Because you're looking at each person's growth and sharing it.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily work that way in a common law relationship, so you really do need to look at what you're getting into.
That's true. I had an interesting situation. I had a prospect that I was talking to a few months ago. She's in a married situation, but however, she wants to. She came into some money from some properties that she sold from overseas, I believe. She wants to buy a property. She's in a married, legally married relationship, but she doesn't want to have anything to do with her spouse in that particular property purchase.
Got it.
So apart from the mortgage qualifying aspect of it, that's a different whole situation there. I want to know, if it's a principal property that you're going to be reside in, you need to have your spousal consent and things like that once you're buying, after you get married, right? So let's say hypothetically now she's buying that for a rental property, and she doesn't want to get her spouse involved at all. We advise her to go and speak to a lawyer. I just want to know, if she comes to you, what would be some advice that you will be sharing with her?
So I'd have a lot of questions, right? Before I would give advice.
Why can't your husband know about this?
No, I don't need to know about that. Everyone has their reasons. The broadest answer is that inheritances are excluded from property division. But you have to be able to trace the asset from when you break up to the inheritance. So you need the will, and then you need to show the estate paying out the asset, and it has to be the same asset that you own, or traceable from the asset that you own.
Yeah.
And sometimes the asset also has income, and you are investing the income in other assets. So it all has to be traceable. So yeah, you should talk to a lawyer about how to set that up, how to make sure that your inheritance is distinct from property that might be shared, if that's something that you want to keep aside, and for most people it is.
It is. Oh, that's interesting.
Also, the person who is seeing a lawyer for their will, if it's in Ontario, an Ontario lawyer will say, by the way, you need to have this clause in your will so that your beneficiary is going to receive the property, and it'll be excluded from marital property division, but also the income will be excluded from marital property division. If you have a will from outside Ontario, that lawyer may not know that an Ontario will has to say that.
Yes.
So there's so many
so
nuances, but that's something else. If you had your will done outside of Ontario and you're leaving Ontario property to someone, you need an Ontario lawyer.
Yes, and that's very important too. This is very, like, the topics that we're discussing today, I feel like it's very important and also very sensitive topics. So I want to be very sensible about this. So let's talk about, like, in situations, parents protecting their child's inheritance and things like that. I'm pretty sure, like, with your experience in the past 20 years, you probably would have come across scenarios that is, in that area. Can you share a little bit about your experience there and what a good advice?
Yeah. So, well, in addition to what I was just saying, which is you need a will drafted. You should get a will drafted, or at least speak to a lawyer in the jurisdiction where the property is. And if you have property in different places, you might need to talk to a lawyer in each one of those places to find out, is there something I need to know?
So, so if you're trying to protect your children's inheritance, will is something that you need to definitely consider having done?
Yeah, and if you're, if it's, before I was talking about how inheritances can be protected by a marriage contract, or even by a will, as long as, or just behavior that protects it, right? Like by keeping it separate.
Yes.
But sometimes that's not how your life is. For example, second marriages, people bringing their families together, and each person might be bringing property in that they want to protect or give to their own children, and not necessarily to their stepchildren. Obviously, that's something you have to talk about with your other spouse, and that's something that you would want to talk to a lawyer about that. As well.
That's very good information you shared there. Definitely, because every family situation is unique and different. So getting the best advice from the best person who's an expert in that area is crucial. Definitely, 100% agreed. I wanted to also touch base on some of misconceptions that we have in the society when it comes to family law and asset management in a relationship. Can you share some insights into that?
I mean, there's a feeling, right, that the other person's going to take you for everything you're worth. And those sorts of situations happen when if that's happening, there's probably something wrong with the process, or one of the people is so toxic that it just is going to be scorched earth. But for most people getting separated, it's not going to result in a deeply unfair situation. Now, if you're talking to your friends and they're colloquial saying like, oh yeah, she got everything, she got the kids, she got the house, she got my income or whatever, then they're probably exaggerating. They might not be, but they're probably exaggerating. And, in the big picture, people don't necessarily appreciate that getting married is such a phenomenally significant financial benefit in almost all cases. In almost all cases, you're pooling resources, whether it's money, income, labor, work, taking care of the household, family, supporting each other emotionally, like that all has value, economic value.
Yes.
That is a basis from which you can have economic success. It's a safety net if you lose your job. All of those huge, important economic benefits. Oh, and not to mention sharing resources, right? You can save a lot on economies of scale just bringing two households together. So being married is an enormous financial benefit, and getting separated is giving up that enormous financial benefit. It's really tough.
Yes.
You're going to take a big hit, and and people don't necessarily understand or acknowledge that economic benefit was partially the structure, it partially comes from you, and it partially comes from the other spouse, who you may not like anymore, who you might detest now. But there were things very likely that they did during your relationship to make you in the financial position you are.
That's true. So everything that need to consider when you're making those big decisions in life, right?
It's hard to think of a more consequential financial decision than whether you get married or not, and who you get married to.
Yes, that's true. Apart from the will, what are some other information or documents that they should consider having to protect their well-being and their financials in that process?
Oh yeah, bank statements, records.
Yes,
records are the most likely thing that's able to protect you, because not being able to find records means you don't have proof of what you owned, especially if it's a date of marriage. So yeah, keeping records matters. Having organized records will help. Like all of that stuff. If you can't prove something, the court expects, if it's your asset and you can't prove that you own it or how much it's worth, they still expect you, if you're going to say that it's yours, to be able to prove it. And if you can't, you sometimes have to drop an issue of money that you're entitled to. So keeping records is very important. It's one of the most expensive aspects of family law. Buy a scanner. It will protect you.
Okay, so in life, like in couple situations, like in relationships, is there any warning signs that that tells them, hey, you need to talk to a lawyer?
I think probably people know.
Probably people know. Okay.
I feel like people know, and the difficult part is to listen to that voice. Like, I should probably talk to a lawyer about this. Oh well, it'll be fine. It's not. It's like, if a person has tooth pain, they know they have to go to the dentist, but a lot of people are scared to do that or reluctant to do it.
Yeah.
You need a will, but you don't want to think about death. You have to think about, if you have kids, you might think about, like, what's going to happen to what would happen to my kids if my spouse and I died? You don't want to think about that. There's all kinds of unpleasant things that we have to just grit our teeth and bear it, but I suspect that people kind of know.
Yes, they know, like, when is the right time. But sometimes, as you mentioned, because we are so hesitant to listen to that voice, and we're like, okay, it's going to be okay, I'll give it more time. It can get more complicated if you don't pay attention to that voice.
Do it as soon as your voice is telling you, you're probably in more trouble than you realize. If your voice is saying, like, last year I should have done this. But absolutely, the earlier, if you can do it while you're still in the relationship, would be the best time, because then the stakes so much better. Yes,
if you need a therapist, go talk to your family therapist, and have that couple consultation with your therapist to work things out. And if by then you will know, hey, do I need to talk to a lawyer or not?
Or you could talk to the lawyer first.
Yeah, whichever works best for you, depending on your situation and scenario.
Yeah, I think it's easier even to bring up, hey, let's talk to the therapist, than talk to the lawyer. Because you associate the lawyer with the end.
Yes.
And you associate the therapist with trying to save it. But talking to the lawyer might change the dynamic, right? It might change your understanding of what the stakes are and what's important.
Yes.
Or even how to make sure that the landing is as soft as possible if you do break up.
Okay, understand. As unpleasant as it is, but if you do end up in a situation now you're separating, what are some of the first things someone should do to protect themselves?
Oh yeah, do your taxes.
Do your taxes, okay.
Do your taxes. Go back, and if you did them yourself, especially if you're a business owner, get someone who knows what they're doing to look at it and do it right. That can save you a lot of money in legal fees. Like buy a scanner. Things like that. I know they're very practical tips, but those are things that will help you quite a lot, especially when it comes to records, and especially if you're a sole business owner. Most small business owners especially are good at what they do. They're good at the product or the service that they provide. They might not be as good at bookkeeping,
record keeping,
like this, just the grind of being a business owner. So even if you are good, still, if you're getting separated, it can make a big difference. That is a time to get your taxes done and have someone who really knows what they're doing to look at those.
Yeah, no, I understand. That's true. So those are very good advice for anybody, who are in those situations to consider and take actions right away.
Yeah.
Most definitely. So I want to ask finally, so in your opinion, as you mentioned in the beginning, you mentioned like, hey, if you look at a couple in York region compared to a Peel region, based on cultural differences that can influence their relationship and so forth, and financial decisions, what do you think the influences would be? Like, what have you seen in the past?
Just broadly speaking, some jurisdictions might have more traditionalist judges than others. But mostly it's about the workings of it's the resources that a specific courthouse might have available to it. And it's not even, and it's not fair, and the federal and provincial governments are not really paying a lot of attention to making sure that there are enough judges in every place and enough support staff. The suburbs are growing at an exponential rate. Well, I don't know if it's like exponential, but the suburbs are growing really fast, and the judicial appointments don't always keep up. And so some locations can just be slower.
Yes.
And if you can't be confident that if something goes really wrong, that you are able to get in front of a judge within however much time, if your situation is not an emergency, but is really important, that's sort of a very difficult zone. The courts will hear emergencies.
Yes.
They will do whatever they need to. If something is urgent and an emergency, and they need to hear it right away and make a decision, they will. If something is important, but not an emergency, it's a gray zone, and sometimes they'll say you have to wait your turn like everyone else.
Yes.
And those are situations where a person might have to make a compromise that they otherwise wouldn't have to.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's true. That's a different way of looking at it. Generally, I wouldn't consider thinking that way, but it's a good thing that you mentioned that. Yeah, and also the cultural influences in different areas. Yeah, right. It's because if you take Peel region, it's very influential by the immigration that's happened. Yeah, and then when you look at Toronto, it's very socialized environment, like it's very city life, right? So the cultural influence also has an attribute towards that, apart from the legal side of it, if I'm not wrong.
It's very subtle, right? Like I practice in Mississauga, and so I am in Peel region, but there is a different culture among lawyers too. You may get a lawyer who's closer to your personality. or who understands the nuance of your situation
Or the background better.
better if it's
Yeah.
someone from your neighborhood.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But this topic has been very interesting. I know that the questions have been very sensitive and the answers too. But you weathered through it and gave us the information that we were really craving to hear. And also for the listeners, I know this is a very touchy subject, but it's always good to know. As long as you know where to turn to in situations that you might know someone else who's going through this, and they might need to hear it. So please go ahead, share this episode with them, and tell them and guide them in the proper path to talk to the leaders, a family lawyer. Yes.
It's tricky to be a lawyer on camera.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much for joining us again today and sharing your valuable insights into family law. And I hope this episode brings value to you. Please go ahead and subscribe for valuable episodes coming up in prospering your wealth and your life. I'll see you on the next episode.
Any legal information obtained during this video may not be applicable to your particular circumstances. If you have a legal concern, you should consult with a lawyer who can give you the specific information and advice that you deserve. Jonathan Klein has practiced family law exclusively for almost 20 years and has represented clients successfully with settlements, trials, and appeals at all levels of court in Ontario. Thank you for spending your time with us on the Stellar Talk Show. We hope you found value in today's episode and gained insights to help elevate your lifestyle. If you enjoyed the discussion, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who could benefit. It means the world to us. Until our next episode, stay inspired, and I'll see you soon on our next Stellar Talk Show.